Hi again, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of the Important You webinar series. My name is Colin Parker, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar, Search Engine Optimization for Dynamic Websites, with Ken Colburn, who is our lead SEO here at Important. We'd love it if you guys would all join in on this webinar. There are a couple of ways you can do that. One is by asking your questions within the questions pane of GoToWebinar, and the other is by tweeting your questions using the hashtag ImportantU. So that's hash Portent, P-O-R-T-E-N-T-U. And just so you all know, in case you miss out on any of today's webinar or you want to review it later with a dev team or with your marketing team, don't worry, because tomorrow you'll actually get a follow-up email with all of the links from this webinar and a link to the actual recording itself. We'll also include in that a slide share link to all of the presentation slides. Since Bitly recently discontinued their link bundle feature again, you'll be able to get all of those links in Ken's follow-up blog post if you missed that email. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ken. Hey, Ken.
Hello. All right. Welcome, everyone. So, just want to do a kind of a brief introduction to myself here. So, and Important. So, I work at Important here in beautiful Seattle. It's a nice sunny day today, so we're excited about that. I am Ken Colburn, the SEO team lead. I've worked for Important for the last 2 years or so, and I've been doing SEO for about 7 years, but I've been working on various aspects of the web for the last 16 or so years. I started out as a web designer, then worked my way into programming, and so I have a great deal of technical background in websites. And then also I love everything to do about analytics. I'm in at least Google Analytics at least once a day, checking on different metrics, and I love going in there to find out how people are using the site. So that part's great. And a little known fact, I also am geeky enough to have learned how to write a unicycle. So that was back in my early teen years. I thought that was the cool thing to do. Little to my knowledge at that point, it didn't work so well for my social life. But now we gotta go on with the rest of this. So, wanted to talk about optimizing dynamic websites. And you might ask, okay, why this subject? And the big thing is, as I said, I've been working with SEO for a while now, and it's something that I've seen a lot, especially as Ajax first started this bringing dynamic content to us, and I've run into it a lot over the years with different clients having issues. And recently, in the last probably year and a half, I've ran into more and more people coming to us with issues. It seems like nowadays it's like every other site I look at has the uses some sort of dynamic content. And first I want to kind of talk about, for those that don't know, what is a dynamic website. And my definition is it's pretty simple. First you have when the browser loads a page, and this is the HTML that is actually given from the site, from the server, into the browser. This is what initially loads. And it could be something like this, just a simple, the logo, maybe a nav up top, and then everything else might not be there at that time. And then the JavaScript loads in all the additional content onto the page after that initial load. So this is what I would say is dynamic website. And this can be done by a variety of different frameworks. You could use Ajax, which really kind of started this off. jQuery, AngularJS, Ember, and React.js as well. And so there's many other ones out there that you can do this with. So, and each one has its pluses and minuses, and each one can be optimized. So the question is, what do we do with all this dynamic website stuff? First, you can create dynamic content. This page looks like, pretty an ordinary page. You have your product description, your picture, price, everything on it, just like a normal website. But if you look at the code of it, it's only 69 lines of code, which is amazing when you think of, the thousands of lines of code that is usually on a website. And even that, with about 20 of this is just, different JavaScript. I see add this and some other plugins. So probably the first 40 are actually the only lines of code that is needed on this site. And then, there's other things that you can do, like Pinterest. Probably the best example of infinite scrolling you can get. People can spend hours on there just continuing to scroll down. And the interesting thing is, only the first 24 pins are in the source code. The rest are brought in dynamically. And then you see different applications, web applications. These are called, single page applications is the official name. And this, you can do anything. In this example, they look up, prices for a moving company. And, this one updates the page without a refresh. So you just put in your moving from, where you're moving to, and pick your home site. And it tells you exactly, okay, it's this many miles, and then it gives you the rest of the information. So the problem that it comes in is, how do the search engine robots view your site? Way back in the day, Google and Yahoo and other search bots, they would just look at the source code and that's it. So they would really miss anything that was JavaScript. And if it wasn't in the source code, it wouldn't show up in their index and you wouldn't rank for it. But nowadays, Google, can understand a little bit more about JavaScript, and it's made some leaps and bounds. There was a recent article by Adam Audet that he explained how he tested various aspects of JavaScript and gave examples of what they were able to crawl and what they weren't. And for the most part, Google did really well at it. Just one thing to note, though, he didn't look into ranking factors, and he also didn't go into anything that complex from what I was able to read on it. So, but it's a good start, but it still has some issues. I've seen from my experience sites that they had really good rankings. They make a big change, adding some AngularJS or something else to the site, and all of a sudden they come to us saying, hey, our rankings have fallen, and so what's going on here? And so there's still issues today, even with Google being able to crawl those JavaScript pages. And one thing you don't want to forget too is being in Yahoo. I mean, I know majority of the site search is coming from Google, but you have to remember Bing doesn't really do as well as Google does with dynamic content. And you have to remember Yahoo uses Bing search results, so anything Bing can't crawl, Yahoo can't crawl. And depending on your audience, that could be up to 25% of your organic traffic. So you really don't want to lose that chunk of people. So I want to talk about an example of a site that I've worked with, and they had some interesting issues. They used different. They used dynamic. The dynamic content. I think really a lot of Ajax features to bring in the product information for the product page, in dynamically. and they were bringing everything in. It was, the name of the product, the description, the images, related product links, even the page title and meta description were being brought in dynamically, and they were they were having some issues with this, where year over year they were seeing around about 10% decline in organic traffic. So it was really hurting them. So we did a test where we removed the Ajax from those product pages, and within a week we started seeing Google, their rankings increase and their traffic increased by 13%, and that was just in that first week. Something to really notice though is Bing. Bing had a really hard time understanding that content, and so the traffic really tanked in the past. So when we made this change, they saw a 106% increase in traffic, which really blew us away. I mean, before that point, I knew Bing had issues, but I didn't know it was that bad. And then similar, Yahoo saw an increase of 72%. So in the same line of Bing. So definitely Bing is not in the same ballpark as Google is. And also if you're working on any international sites, you might come up with other search engines that are dominant in that area. So you really have to be careful of what kind of technology you use on the site, because not everyone is up to par with Google's search crawling. So now we're going to kind of talk about, okay, what's the problem? What kind of issues can you find or can you see with the dynamic content or dynamic websites? And the first thing is, what we see and what the search engines see are a lot of times different. Here's an example. I did a fetch as Google for this site, and initially, the content was really gone. You couldn't see anything. They couldn't interact with it. All we saw was that little pop up there, new moving New York City. That was it. That's all that Google could see. But there was much more to the page. And what was really concerning to me was also the navigation for the site was bad. So not only affects this page, but it affects all these other pages that it's linked to. Because if Google's looking for different links off of this page to crawl the rest of the site and they can't find it, they might not be able to find those other pages. And also that you lose that link authority that you would get from your different internal links on your site. So another important thing to realize, that you want to make sure not only your content shows up, but also your navigation. So this is another interesting one. This is more of another web app, but with this one, you really can't. There's no browsing. It's really simple. It's really search centric. So search engines really don't go in and do searches on their own, because you could have some really weird results from that. And this one, let's say, okay, I actually do a search. And like I said here, search engines really don't know what to do with this. So I do a search for Seattle, find any Seattle hotels, because I'm familiar with that. So first thing that happens is this pop down shows up. Okay, what area in Seattle? So I pick downtown. Then it asks me, okay, when do you want to show up? What's your check-in and check-out date? Okay, then I finally get to the content of the site here. So there's no way that a search engine would be able to do that on its own. The only way it would be able to do that is if Google finally perfected their artificial intelligence. But we're hopefully a far ways from there. Another thing that is a problem, where I mentioned it already, is it's dynamic content is not the greatest for navigation, especially if you have to interact with the page to see the next level of navigation. So you might have a site like this where it's basic. You have one page that links to a few, and then they link to a few more. If you have any issues with Google or Bing not being able to understand your links, the number of pages indexed is going to be an issue because they're not going to be able to find them, and that's going to really cause indexing to go bad and your rankings to fall. And this is even if those pages at the end there are not even dynamic. Those can be give the servers and people a whole HTML version of the page that's easily readable, but if the search engines can't get to it, then your rankings are going to fall or not exist at all. So there's issues with that. So you want to make sure that that the pages are browsable. And when all these problems happen, first thing, rankings, they tank. And then along with that, your customers or other traffic to the website, it tanks as well. And that's usually when somebody gives me a call and say, hey, what's going on? We just launched this new website and all our rankings are gone. And so, that's the issue. Now, to be fair, there's probably some websites with, with these types of technology that are fine. But, people are only coming to me when there's a problem. So I'm seeing a lot of the issues. There's probably some that are fine, but, I don't usually see those as much. So, and I want to tell you, it's not all that bad. I don't want to say, okay, don't use AngularJS, don't use Ajax for anything. That's not the way that we want to do it, because realistically, people that just spent tons of money making a new site, they don't want to have to go back to the drawing board and start over. That's usually not possible. And the good thing is we can fix a majority of these things, if not all of them. So what can you do? The first thing is take a look at Google's developer site here. They have a whole list of best practices of what to do. It goes into much more detail than I can at this point. But like you said, like you could see here, making Ajax applications crawlable. Perfect. And that also goes along with any of the AngularJS or other frameworks. It's the same concepts. So, the big thing is making sure that the search engines are not blocked from seeing your content. So here's an example. You can say, oh, okay, I'm pointing at the screen here. So, in the top corner, you can see, okay, the person's not showing up for the nearest store. The address isn't showing up at the bottom. And, so you can see, okay, something's wrong there. Nice thing about using Fetch as Google, you scroll down and it tells you exactly what is blocked. And so in this case, you can see, okay, the images to that manager photo is blocked, and that Ajax script is also blocked. And so it's perfect. It tells you what to do, because Google's really trying to help you get visible as well. So then if you go in further and click that robots.txt tester link there, it takes you to your robots.txt file, and it shows you exactly which line is blocking that content. So it's a great tool to really quick and easily debug that. So there should be no issues. And this is kind of a change of the old way of thinking, where we used to block all the JavaScript, all the CSS, and even some of the images from search engines because they would show up funky in the search results. But nowadays we have to switch our way of thinking and really show Google everything that has to do with rendering that page or rendering the site. If you don't do it, they're not going to be able to see that content. Another thing that Google talks about in their best practices is HTML snapshots. Now, this is an interesting thing which not a lot of people understand completely. To put it simply, when you want to show Google a different version of the site than you're showing your normal customers. Now, this gets tricky because you can get into some issues with, with cloaking. So you want to be careful. But you want to, what it does is you try to offer up Google an HTML version that's not dynamic back instead of all the JavaScript version that you give your regular customers and users. So what you want is it to look exactly like what you see, but it's just an HTML version that's already pre-rendered. So that way Google has no issues with the JavaScript, and so it makes it much easier for them to crawl and understand what's going on the page. Now, there's some easy ways to do this, because if you ever try to code one of those snapshots by yourself, you could probably tell it takes a long time to do it yourself. So other services have popped up recently to do this for you. NPM, Ajax Snapshot, Brombone are just a few of these. But what they make it really easy, and the cost is pretty minimal for what they give you. And so what they'll do is they'll crawl your site, create those HTML snapshots, and then you can tie into their system by an API and grab those and serve them automatically to the search engines. So it makes it much easier to give those search engines an HTML version of your site. So it's one thing that Google says in their best practices to do. So definitely want to do it. I've heard recently that Google might be going away from those best practices, but still, like I said before, being Yahoo, other smaller search engines are not as advanced. So even if Google goes away from the HTML snapshots, you want to do it for those other search engines. Another thing is you want to make browsable pathways. Like in this version of the Room 77 hotel search here, it's real easy for the human to go and do some searches. But where's the robot going to go to find what's on the site? How do they browse it? And on this page they have, okay, you go down to the footer and you can say, okay, there's Seattle hotels, I'm going to choose that. And then you go to the page, you go, oh, there's the content I'm looking for. And these pages are really browsable by the search engines. And it's perfect for them. And then you also see on the side there's more browsable content that they can get to. Now, this page itself isn't perfect because it only shows for Seattle 10 hotels, and I know there's a lot more hotels in Seattle than that. So there's the See All Hotels button at the top and the bottom, but that just takes you to the one-page application again. So they're not doing the best there. And another thing is, this only shows the very popular searches. What about the not so popular ones? What if I want to go to Portland? What if I want to go to Sacramento, California? What about those cities? I can bet you that the site's not ranking well for those other cities because the search engines can't get to that content. So another thing that will help is to create XML sitemaps. And what this will do is it will help Google find those pages that it might have trouble finding. Now, one thing to note, this is not a replacement for internal linking. These XML sitemaps are not going to give you any link juice or link value for that your normal internal linking would do. So it's a good thing to help the search engines find those pages, but it's not a replacement for getting that good internal browsable linking. The next thing you can do is use dynamic functionality sparingly. Think about what you really need to use it on the site for. Do you really need to dynamically feed your page title and meta description? Really? No. And also, don't use loading the stuff after the initial page load as a band-aid. I've heard a lot of sites that they use this because they have their page load speed is really bad, and so they want to be able to do the initial load and then have the rest load load next, and so the user can see the logo and navigation real quickly. But that's a bad thing, because it still takes forever for your main content to load, and that's what the people came here to the site to see. And also, just do the just fix the things that you need to get done first. Fix that page load speed. Most of the time that will hurt you in the long run anyways. If your database is slow, fix that. If your images are not optimized, fix that. There's a lot of things you can do before you use the dynamic content to help things get quicker. Another thing is go slow. Test things out. You don't have to redesign your entire site using AngularJS or anything else all at one time. I would definitely test things out with one section at a time, and then see how the search engines react to it, and get things dialed in before you start on the next section. And that way you can make sure that everything is going smooth, that you're not losing tons of traffic. And so that's kind of all I have for my webinar today. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them on the webinar here. I'll turn this back over to Colin.
Thanks, Ken. That was extremely informative, and I think definitely leaves a lot of questions open, since we can't get into each framework or technique here, but we can certainly do some of that in questions if you guys want to drill down on some specific topics while we're here. So don't forget, all the resources Ken referenced will be available in a follow-up blog post on Portent.com. And let's open it up for questions and answers. I know we had a lot of them. Some of them actually came from inside of Portent, as our lead developer was picking at some of the things that Ken was saying, because of all of the UX improvements that are often offered by going with a dynamic framework and serving all of your content within a much more limited space or a single page. Mm-hmm. So let's start with. Actually, this is a great one. So whether or not, Ken, you think there is a right or kind of a best practice as far as all of these dynamic website creation techniques goes between Ajax, Angular, Ember, or is it just a matter of any of them, whichever serves the need best, but continuing to go through the process you outlined here? Is there a right answer?
Not really. It can be, you could use all of them and optimize all of them just fine. One thing that I know different developers have pointed out to me is, AngularJS, it was created by Google, so why can't they crawl that? And it's true, it was created by Google, but if you don't optimize it, you're still going to have issues. So either way you go on this, you could still have issues if you don't fully optimize the site for it. And a lot of times when I've seen problems, people aren't following those basic best practices that Google has laid out for them.
I think that's a great place to leave that. And of course, we're happy to debate if anybody wants to get into whether there's one or another that's better for pure SEO purposes. Mm-hmm. So let's take another question from within GoToWebinar. So Ed asks, my site uses normal HTML except for the header, which has a jQuery slider using lazy load, good for you, Ed, to load images. Have you seen issues with sliders loading images dynamically?
Yeah, I haven't really seen any issues with that. Images are a little bit different than the regular content. With the big thing is if you're lazy loading those images, I don't see an issue really. The big thing is if any content links, especially in your navigation, are not being brought in initially, that could be an issue. But like I said, I'd have to see the site to see what's going on, but I really don't see a problem with loading images like that. That's not an issue.
I think that's a great place to leave that. There's not necessarily anything fundamentally wrong with it. It's all about what you described, which is go slow and test.
Exactly.
So let's go to the next question. Anna actually, this is great. So Anna commented, and this is right, that Google recently announced it may discontinue its Ajax crawlable guidelines. And we will probably include the link to the article that she shared in the notes here as a follow-up. But the question is really, do you still recommend, Ken, using HTML snapshots in light of that announcement?
Yeah, definitely. I would still recommend it. The Google, announcement. It wasn't really a real announcement. They mentioned it in a webinar that they were doing, but it wasn't anything official at this point. Will that be going away soon? Possibly. So I think Google's still getting to the point where they're perfecting their rendering techniques, and that might not be needed for Google. But the other search engines definitely still need it. Like I showed in my example, Bing had huge issues with some basic Ajax calls, and they're going to continue to have issues with some of this complicated coding. So I'd say maybe not as much for Google, but definitely for Bing and some of the other smaller search engines.
I think that's great. I'm going to give a quick nudge to Marjorie. I'd love to answer that question, Marjorie. You asked if those browsable pages are static. Can you give a little bit more elaboration there? And we'll get back to that question in just a minute. We'll go on to Matt, who asks, should browsable pathways lead to the same URLs as the dynamic pages themselves?
If you can, definitely yes. Other things you can do is you can use canonical tags to lead back to the non-dynamic version of the page as well. So in a perfect world, yeah, you want it to use the same URLs, but I know sometimes that's not possible. So you can use different workarounds like canonical tags and other things. So
I think that's a great question, Matt, and that kind of gets also back to the idea of distance from perfect. There's the ideal solution, and there's the one that's actually accommodated by the infrastructure that you've built, the needs that you need to serve, the business goals for the specific page that you're building. And so that becomes kind of a case-by-case thing, but Ken, I think that's a great answer. And Matt, thank you for that question. That was great. So David asks, have you had issues with keeping pre-render cache clean, quote unquote? For example, inclusive of only canonical URLs? And if so, how do you cope with that?
On that one, I'm not really sure what he's talking about. I haven't run into that issue, so at this point I can't answer that one. But if you give me a follow-up email or a tweet and talk a little bit more about it, I'm definitely willing to follow up on that one.
Yeah, and when Fortin approaches problems like this, what we'll typically do is bring in our lead developer along with an SEO to tackle this, because in a lot of cases, you're getting beyond SEO here. You're talking about straight up site performance, which definitely impacts SEO. We've done some research that got picked up about the impact that site speed actually does have on your ranking. That's pretty common as well, but what you're talking about with keeping your cache clean for page speed, that definitely is kind of a cross-functional question, one that we'd be happy to go into a little bit more. So David, thank you for that question. Let's go back to Marjorie really quickly. So Marjorie was looking specifically under the browsable pathways topic. Popular search pages were suggested.
Mhm.
So are those static pages?
You know, for this example, I didn't look into it too much, but I believe they were static. There might be some dynamic elements to them, but for the most part, you know, the basic idea for that is you need to be able to get the search engine to those pages. Even if they are dynamic, you still need to get them there. So that's a very important part of creating that browsable pathway, is being able to allow the search engines to find those pages and then be able to render them from that point.
That's a great question. Let me go back here, and so we've got a question from Karthik next. And Karthik, apologies if I've mispronounced that. Do you have any suggestions on using prerender.io as an SEO crawlability solution for dynamic content?
And that one is a little bit beyond me. So.
Well, Karthik, I'll jump in really quickly and say, prefetching or pre-rendering is something that we are actively exploring here at Portent. It's not something I think we're ready to talk about just yet. There's going to be an ebook coming out in a little bit around site speed, site performance, and that's going to be a major topic there. Mm-hmm. So I'll have to leave it with that teaser and say, yes, that's the kind of thing that I think people are going to be well served to look at as the need for perceived lightning fast page load speed increases. The expectation from your users is probably that your site be getting faster and faster and faster, which is where a lot of this dynamic content comes in handy and becomes just something where you need to watch out for what it does to your organic traffic. Mm-hmm. So we'll come back to that for sure, Karthik, and that's a great question. Thank you. Anna asks, can we share the resource for the page speed impact on SEO? Yeah, the two that jump to mind, Anna, and I'll just reference them now, and we'll try to include these in the webinar notes. So Ian Lurie, our founder and CEO, has done a couple of decks. My personal favorite is called Distance from Perfect, where you talk about the holistic quality of your site, of which site speed is a huge indicator, and what that actually does to Google's perception of how valuable your page actually is beyond just the relevance factors, like what content is there and what your meta descriptions say. And then the other one is an article by Michael Wiegand, Tim Gilman, and Ian Lurie, where we looked at a broad cross-section of websites, specifically and largely in e-commerce, to determine what the correlation between site speed and conversion rate / revenue actually was. That's a great article that basically shows you across the sites sampled, when you shave a second here and a second there, the jump in conversion rate from, like, I think it's 5 seconds to 3 to 2, 2 to 1, and so on. And we'll try to include that in the show notes as well. David asked, just clarifying, if you set up a service to serve HTML snapshots of pages, there's a cache of HTML snapshots and the URLs they'll be served against. So these URLs can have campaign parameters and other weird things appended to the canonical URLs. David will follow up with Ken, but if Ken, you've got any additional thoughts here before we take it to the Twitters.
Yeah, there's definitely it can create some ugly URLs with those different parameters on there. There's some different ways. Yeah, I'll follow up with you, David, or kind of reach out to me on Twitter, and I'll answer that a little bit more specific.
Outstanding. So I think we're getting to the end. We might take one more question before we let everybody get back to their day. Feel free to shoot that in on GoToWebinar. We'll check Twitter just really quickly. It looks like we're good on Twitter, so we'll get one more from the GoToWebinar pane. Oh, this is a great one. This is a little bit more fundamental SEO, but since we know we've got a lot of developers on the webinar today, let's ask this one. Ken, you talked about cloaking. What is cloaking, and how can you avoid it as you're actually building a dynamic application?
Okay, so when we talked about setting up the HTML snapshot, which is basically a copy of your page that's already pre-rendered, just a separate version of it. So what you want to make sure is if you serve the search engine something different where the content changes, then that would be considered cloaking. Now, you're going to have some minor changes in the content when you do the snapshot, but what we're talking about is anything that's really intentionally deceptive. So, the initial thing of cloaking was where people were trying to get traffic to a site for one keyword, and then when people got to it, they found out it was for something totally different. So maybe you were doing a search for truck accessories, and you landed onto the site, and it was nothing but Viagra. So that's the bait and switch that cloaking talks about in the big thing. But you want to just make sure that you're as close as possible to the content that you share with the search engines that you are with the normal users. So you want to make sure that everything is on that page. You want to make sure the navigation is included. You want to make sure the title and the heading title, the page title, meta description, all that is in there and matches up with what the normal people, when they come to the site, what they see.
That's a great one, and I think that's probably a great place for us to leave it. So that gets back to some more SEO fundamentals. If you guys are interested in doing a little bit more of the fundamentals on SEO, we've got a video series out on YouTube that Ian Lurie, our founder, has been putting out. I think it's a lot of fun, just little bite-sized pieces. If you guys want to get into, what is cloaking, what are rich text snippets, things like that. Okay, so don't forget that if you have any more questions for Ken, you can tweet them directly to him at Kejaco. I don't even know how you pronounce that, Kejaco, or you can tweet them to @Porton. And if you'd like, make sure you use that hashtag PortonU. And then just a reminder again, today's webinar and the presentation slides, all those links will be coming your way tomorrow in a follow-up email as well as on the blog. So next month, I hope you guys can join us for our June webinar. We're going to take a step back from SEO, which is actually, shockingly, not all we do here at Porton. Porton is a fully integrated digital marketing agency. We're going to have our awesome PPC team get back to some PPC fundamentals and strategy that you should really be considering in 2015, knowing that not all of us live that all day, every day, but definitely need to be fluent in it so that you can work with your colleagues across the aisle. Okay, as always, if you don't want to wait to sign up for that next webinar, you'll be able to do that via porton.com, or you can use the webinar tab on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/porton.marketing. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. Appreciate all the great questions and have a great day.